Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the streets of ancient Rome. Marble columns gleam in the sunlight, senators pass by in their flowing togas, and the air hums with the pride of an empire at its peak. But not far from this grandeur, at the heavy wooden gate of a nobleman's villa, a different scene unfolds. A young woman is chained to the doorway. Her wrists are bound with iron shackles, her body slumped against the stone wall. On her forehead, the raw mark of a hot iron still smolders, the letters FVG, short for fugitiva, a runaway. People pass without stopping. Some glance at her with pity, others with contempt. But no one intervenes. In this moment, she is no longer seen as a person. She has become a warning, a living symbol of what happens when one dares to resist. This is not a scene of cruelty hidden in shadows. It is cruelty displayed openly, woven into the fabric of Roman life. For enslaved women who tried to escape, punishment was never private, it was spectacle. It was designed to scar not only the body, but also the soul. Branding, chaining, whipping, even being thrown to wild beasts, each punishment carried a psychological message. You are not your own. You belong to us. And here lies the paradox. Rome, the empire that gave us philosophy, law, and architecture, also built its power on public displays of domination. The suffering of enslaved women was not an accident of history, it was a deliberate tool of control. In the next chapters of this story, we will journey into those punishments. We will see how branding burned away dignity, how the arena turned death into entertainment, and how exile to the mines erased lives in silence. More than history, this is a mirror, forcing us to ask, in our world today, have we truly left behind the need to control through humiliation and fear? In the heart of Rome, punishment was not only about pain, it was about permanence. Imagine the moment, a young enslaved woman, dragged before her master after a failed attempt to flee. Her hair is pulled back, her arms pinned by 2 guards. In the center of the courtyard, a small brazier glows with burning coals. Resting inside is an iron rod, its tip shaped into crude letters. The air smells of ash and hot metal. The crowd, household servants, neighbors, even curious passers-by, gathers in silence. Everyone knows what is about to happen. To run from slavery was not merely disobedience, it was treason against the order of Rome itself. The punishment must be exemplary. With a nod from the master, the iron is lifted from the fire. Its tip, glowing red, hisses as it meets her skin. She screams. The letters are pressed into her forehead, FVG, short for fugitiva, a runaway. In some cases, the inscription was even longer. Tenio, fugitive, I hold you, fugitive. Her body will heal, but the mark will never fade. From this day on, her face itself becomes a document of shame. Branding was not symbolic theater. It was a deliberate act of psychological and social execution. In Roman society, appearance defined a woman's dignity. Beauty, modesty, and honor were her only fragile shields against exploitation. To mar her face was to strip her of all protection. A branded woman was not just a slave, she was a corrupted slave, a human being disfigured into property marked as defective. The consequences went far beyond the searing pain. The mark ensured she could never pass as free. If she tried to blend into the crowd, the scar betrayed her. If she dreamed of escape, her face gave her away. Branding turned the body into a prison, the skin into shackles. She carried her punishment wherever she went, long after the chains were removed. And for others who watched, the lesson was even sharper. The branding iron was not only pressed into one woman's skin, it was burned into the imagination of all who might have considered resistance. Every scream, every scar, was a warning. Do not dream of freedom. From a psychological perspective, branding was one of the most insidious tools of control. Unlike whipping, which left scars hidden beneath clothing, the mark was deliberately placed where it could not be concealed, on the forehead, the very space of identity. Social psychologists today might call it public labeling, the reduction of a human being to a single stigmatized identity. Once labeled, she is no longer seen as a person with complexity, but only as the runaway. The mark defines her. Is this so different from what we do now? Consider how modern society still brands people, not with hot irons, but with labels. Criminal, failure, immigrant, unworthy. Once applied, such labels shape how others treat the individual, and over time, how the individual comes to see themselves. Just as the Roman iron etched letters into flesh, our words etch identities into the human psyche. The cruelty of Roman branding lies in its permanence. A single moment of resistance defined a woman for life. She was never again allowed to rewrite her story. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying aspect, the denial of redemption. But history also whispers a different truth. The Romans intended branding to silence the will of enslaved women, to make them examples of fear. Yet, paradoxically, these marks now testify to their courage. Each scar was earned because someone dared to imagine freedom, even at unbearable risk. The iron was Rome's attempt to erase rebellion, but in memory, it has become proof of defiance. So when we look at the branded forehead of a woman in ancient Rome, we are not just seeing shame. We are seeing resistance made visible. Her body carries both the punishment of slavery and the courage of escape. And perhaps in that paradox lies the lesson for us today. Society may brand us, but it cannot fully define us, unless we allow the mark to write the end of our story. Picture a grand Roman villa, its marble steps polished by the footsteps of senators, merchants, and honored guests. The doorway, the iannua, was not just an entrance, but a stage where status was displayed. To walk through those doors was to cross into the heart of Roman authority and family pride. But for some enslaved women, that threshold became a prison. There, shackled in iron, stood the fugitiva. Her ankles bound, her arms stretched to a column by the gate, she was not allowed to hide in shadows. She was placed in the brightest of lights, where every visitor, every passerby, could see her humiliation. Day after day, she remained, exposed to sun and rain, hunger and thirst, until her body became part of the architecture itself. This punishment, known as ad iannuum, at the gate, was uniquely cruel. Rome understood symbols better than any empire, and what symbol could be clearer than a runaway chained to the very threshold of her master's home? She was a living signpost, a silent warning to all who might dream of rebellion. This is what becomes of those who defy. For a woman, the shame was multiplied. Roman society was deeply concerned with female modesty. A respectable woman, freeborn or enslaved, was expected to remain within the private sphere, hidden from the gaze of strangers. To be forced into public exposure, restrained where all eyes could linger, was itself a violation. The punishment used not only iron but also visibility as a weapon. And the public gaze is never neutral. Some would laugh. Some would leer. Others might whisper, mocking her weakness. Few, if any, would dare to show compassion. The spectacle was carefully crafted to erase dignity, to transform a human being into an object of ridicule. What we see here is not only punishment, but degradation. From a psychological perspective, ad iannuum was devastating. Modern psychology tells us that public humiliation is one of the most destructive experiences a person can endure. Unlike private suffering, humiliation attacks the social self, the identity we hold in the eyes of others. To be laughed at, scorned, or ignored while shackled at the gate was to experience a kind of social death. The woman was not only punished, she was erased as a person. This practice also reveals a profound truth about power. Authority is never content with obedience alone. It craves spectacle. Rome could have punished the woman privately, behind closed doors. But that would not have been enough. Her body had to become a lesson, her shame a theater. In this way, punishment was transformed into propaganda. And yet, as chilling as this image is, it should feel disturbingly familiar. Have we truly left this behind? Think of the digital world, where public shaming has become a modern pillory. One mistake, one misstep, and an individual's name can be chained to the gates of the internet. Mocked, cursed, and condemned by thousands of strangers. The punishment may no longer be iron shackles, but the principle is the same, visibility weaponized to destroy. Consider how online mobs often deny their targets basic dignity. Compassion is scarce, ridicule abundant. The victim becomes an object, a spectacle, defined entirely by their error. The Romans might have recognized this dynamic well. It is not so different from the enslaved woman at the gate, her body reduced to a warning, her humanity consumed by the crowd. But here lies the paradox. Rome thought it was silencing rebellion. In truth, every woman chained at the gate was evidence that rebellion existed, that someone had dared to seek freedom. The chains were meant to erase her will, yet they also testified to her courage. So when we imagine her, standing beneath the arch of a Roman villa, we should not only see humiliation. We should also see resilience. Her suffering was designed as a warning, but it can also be read as a reminder. Even in the most brutal systems, the desire for freedom burns fiercely enough to risk chains, shame, and death. The roar of the crowd shakes the stone walls of the amphitheater. Vendors shout above the noise, selling figs, bread, and wine. Children perch on their fathers' shoulders, eager for the spectacle. Trumpets blare, and all eyes turn to the sand below. For most Romans, this is a holiday, a celebration of power and empire. But for one woman, dragged into the arena in chains, it is the end of everything. She is not a gladiator. She has not been trained to fight. She has not even been armed, except perhaps with a wooden stick or a dull blade meant only to prolong her suffering. Her real role is not combat but display. She is there to be broken, a body offered up for the pleasure of the masses. The gates at the far end creak open. A lion, half-starved and restless, leaps forward. The crowd erupts in excitement. For them, this is not execution, it is entertainment. For her, it is terror. Stripped of dignity, stripped even of clothing in some cases, she faces not just death but the humiliation of becoming a spectacle of pain. This punishment was known as damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It was Rome's way of dealing with those deemed beyond redemption: rebels, criminals, deserters, and yes, runaway slaves. Unlike a quick death by sword, this was designed to be drawn out, theatrical. Sometimes victims were tied to stakes, sometimes forced into reenactments of mythological stories, burned alive like Hercules, torn apart like Orpheus. In every case, the goal was the same: to transform punishment into performance. From a psychological perspective, the arena reveals the darkest side of human nature, the capacity to normalize cruelty when it is wrapped in ritual and spectacle. What should provoke empathy instead evokes applause. The crowd is not horrified, they are entertained. Social psychologists call this phenomenon de-individuation. In a mass of thousands, individuals lose their personal sense of responsibility. They cheer for what, alone, they might find monstrous. For enslaved women, the cruelty was sharpened by gender. Their deaths were often staged in ways that mocked their femininity, cast as sacrificial figures, paraded before wild beasts, or forced to fight one another with minimal weapons. Their bodies became canvases for Rome's imagination of domination, their suffering transformed into theater. It is easy to condemn the Romans for their savagery. Yet, the uncomfortable question remains: have we truly changed? We may not fill amphitheaters to watch lions tear people apart, but we still consume suffering as entertainment. Reality shows thrive on humiliation. Viral videos capture fights, accidents, breakdowns, all consumed with the same voyeuristic thrill that once filled the Colosseum. The spectacle is digital, but the psychology is the same. Someone else's pain becomes our amusement. The arena also exposes the relationship between power and visibility. Rome could have executed runaway slaves quietly, with a single sword stroke. But a private death would not send the same message. The arena amplified suffering, turning it into propaganda. Every scream, every drop of blood, was a performance reinforcing the authority of empire. The enslaved woman's death was not just hers, it was a public ritual reminding all slaves that resistance leads to ruin. Yet, paradoxically, these staged deaths also testify to defiance. For a woman to stand in that arena, even in chains, meant that she had once dared to imagine another life. Her very presence on the sand was proof that she had resisted. Rome wanted to erase her will, but in trying to display her failure, it also revealed her courage. So when we picture the crowd cheering as beasts lunge forward, we should not see only cruelty. We should also recognize the hidden truth beneath the spectacle. The enslaved woman, stripped of everything, still embodies the one thing Rome could never fully destroy: the human longing for freedom. And perhaps that is why her story still unsettles us. Because in every society, ancient or modern, we must ask, when does punishment stop being justice, and when does it become entertainment? The The courtyard is silent, except for the sharp whistle of leather cutting the air. Then comes the crack, flesh against iron-tipped lashes. A scream follows, echoing through the domus. Servants pause in their work. Some avert their eyes, others watch without expression. For them, this is not unusual. It is part of daily life in Rome, as common as bread baking or water being drawn from the well. The woman writhes under the blows. Her back is striped with blood, her garments shredded, her dignity torn away with each lash. The instrument used is no simple whip. It is the flagrum, a multi-thonged lash, its ends weighted with sharp bits of bone or metal. Each strike is not only pain, but tearing. The skin opens, the muscles bruise, the body trembles. There is no limit to the number of lashes. No law protects her. The master decides when enough is enough, and sometimes there is no end until exhaustion claims her. In Rome, whipping was the punishment of choice for runaway slaves. It required no elaborate preparation, no arena, no branding iron. It was immediate, flexible, and effective. But beyond its efficiency, whipping carried a psychological power. It was both intimate and public. Unlike branding, which scarred once and forever, whipping could be repeated endlessly. Unlike execution, it left the victim alive to serve again. It reminded both the punished and the observers that the enslaved body belonged entirely to the master's will. Writers of the time mention whipping casually. In comedies by Plautus, in the satires of Juvenal, in the witty tales of Petronius, slaves being beaten appear as background humor. To laugh at their suffering was to affirm the normalcy of violence. What shocks us today was entertainment for Roman audiences then. This casual acceptance shows the true horror of whipping, not the pain itself, but the way society had normalized it. Modern psychology calls this process desensitization. When cruelty is repeated often enough, the shock fades. Violence becomes ordinary, even expected. For enslaved women, this meant their suffering was not seen as an outrage, but as discipline. Their screams blended into the rhythm of Roman life, silenced by indifference. For women, the humiliation was layered. Whipping often left them half-clothed or exposed before the eyes of others. It was not only a punishment of the body but also of modesty. Roman culture tied a woman's honor to her appearance. To be displayed in pain, garments torn, bloodied and broken, was to be stripped of that honor forever. The whip scarred not just the skin but the identity. And yet, this normalization of violence is not a relic of the past. Think of how in modern life, some forms of cruelty are accepted as discipline or tradition. Think of schools where beatings were once routine, or workplaces where humiliation is treated as motivation. Consider how bullying, physical or digital, is often dismissed as kids being kids. Like the Romans, we risk teaching ourselves that cruelty is natural. But what the Romans could not erase, even with endless lashes, was the persistence of resistance. Every runaway who endured whipping had first dared to challenge the order of things. Every scar was proof that she had once imagined herself free. The whip could wound the body, but it could not fully extinguish the spark of defiance that had led her to flee. Perhaps that is why the image of whipping unsettles us so deeply. It forces us to confront the thin line between correction and cruelty, between discipline and domination. Rome crossed that line without hesitation, embedding violence into daily life until no one questioned it. And so the question echoes forward to us. When violence becomes normal, who dares to say it is wrong? The whip was more than leather and metal. It was a symbol of ownership, a sound that declared mastery, a rhythm of fear. But in the silence after the lash, in the breath drawn through pain, there was still a trace of humanity refusing to be broken. And in that trace, perhaps, lies the truth Rome never understood. Control built on cruelty may command obedience, but it never truly commands the soul. Far from the marble splendor of Rome, beyond the laughter of its arenas and the bustle of its markets, lay another world, one carved into rock, suffocating and silent. These were the mines, places of endless darkness where the condemned were sent not to live, but to wither slowly. For enslaved women who attempted escape, being sentenced in Medellum, to the mines, was not just punishment. It was a death sentence stretched across months, even years, until the body collapsed and the name was forgotten. Imagine the descent. Shackled to a line of other captives, a woman is marched down into a narrow shaft. The air grows heavy, thick with dust and the stench of sweat. There is little light, only the flicker of torches revealing jagged walls. The deeper they go, the less the outside world exists. Once she enters, she may never see the sun again. The work is relentless. Stones are hacked apart with primitive tools. Ore is hauled on bent backs, heavy baskets cutting into raw skin. Collapse is constant. Dust chokes the lungs. Water drips from above, mixing with blood and sweat on the floor. The women work alongside men, enduring the same brutal tasks but with added vulnerability. Harassment, assault, pregnancies that end in tragedy. Some give birth in the tunnels, only for their infants to die within days from cold, hunger, or neglect. Unlike the arena, where death was a public performance, the mines erased death in silence. No applause, no spectacle, only exhaustion, starvation, and despair. For Rome, this was the perfect punishment for repeat runaways, an erasure, a disappearance. The condemned did not return. Their lives dissolved into the darkness, as if they had never existed. From a psychological perspective, this form of punishment was uniquely cruel. Branding scarred the body, whipping inflicted pain, chaining humiliated, but the mind's annihilated presence. To be cast underground was to be removed from the social world entirely. Modern psychologists might call this social death, the loss of recognition, of identity, of place in the human community. The woman in the mines was not just punished, she was made invisible. And invisibility is, in many ways, more terrifying than pain. Pain shouts. Invisibility whispers nothingness. To be forgotten while still alive is perhaps the deepest cruelty. The Romans understood this well. By sending fugitives into the mines, they not only destroyed the body but also silenced the possibility of rebellion. No one could be inspired by a woman they could no longer see. Yet the mines also reveal something profound about systems of control. They thrive on concealment. Public punishments like the arena displayed Rome's power. Hidden punishments like the mines concealed its ugliest truths. Out of sight, the empire could maintain its image of order and grandeur, while beneath the earth countless lives were extinguished unnoticed. The mines were the empire's shadow, its prosperity above ground built upon invisible suffering below. It is tempting to think of this as a cruelty unique to Rome. But do we not also hide suffering today? Factories where laborers toil unseen, prisons where lives are erased behind walls, refugee camps forgotten by the world's gaze. The structures change, but the psychology is familiar. When suffering is hidden, it is easier for society to ignore. For the women condemned to the mines, there was no monument, no elegy, no grave marked with their names. Their stories survive only in fragments of law codes, in scattered inscriptions, in the whispers of history. And yet, their silence speaks. Each nameless death in the mines testifies to the desperation that led them to flee in the first place. They chose to risk chains, lashes, even this slow annihilation, because the alternative, lifelong bondage, was worse. So when we imagine the darkness swallowing them, we must not see only despair. We must also see courage. To end in the mines meant one had once reached for freedom, however briefly. And in that reaching lies a truth that Rome could never bury, that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit strains toward light. History is often told in marble and triumph, in arches, in legions, in the glory of emperors. But beneath the monuments of Rome lies a darker truth. The empire's order was upheld not only by laws and armies, but by fear. And nowhere was that fear carved more brutally than into the bodies of enslaved women who dared to seek freedom. We have followed their stories, the hot iron branding their foreheads with a mark of shame, the iron chains fastening them to the gates of their masters' homes, their humiliation displayed for all to see, the arenas where they were stripped of dignity and thrown to beasts, their deaths turned into theater, the whips lashing flesh until cruelty became ordinary, and finally, the mines, where darkness erased their existence in silence. Each punishment reveals something essential about Rome. Branding showed its obsession with permanence, scars that never fade. Chaining revealed its hunger for spectacle, turning a person into a warning. The arena exposed its appetite for entertainment, pain consumed as pleasure. Whipping displayed its normalization of cruelty, violence woven into daily life. And the mines uncovered its shadow, the silent spaces where suffering could be hidden, erased from memory. Together, these punishments formed more than discipline. They were architecture, structures of control designed to maintain a system where human beings were reduced to property. For women, the cruelty carried an added weight. Their bodies were not only enslaved, but gendered, judged by appearance, modesty, and fertility. To scar their faces, to expose their bodies, to silence their voices, this was to strip away every layer of dignity until nothing remained but obedience. And yet, the very existence of these punishments tells us something Rome never intended, that enslaved women resisted. That they fled again and again, knowing the price. Every brand was the aftermath of a choice to run. Every chain at the gate was evidence of a step taken toward freedom. Every death in the arena, every scar from the whip, every disappearance into the mines, each was born of defiance. Rome wanted their suffering to erase their humanity, but history transforms it into proof of courage. What lessons do these stories carry for us? At first glance, they seem remote, relics of a brutal past. But look closer, and the patterns remain. We may not brand foreheads with irons, but we brand people with labels: criminal, outcast, failure, marks that shape how society sees them. We may not chain people to gates, but we expose them to public shaming online, weaponizing visibility to destroy reputations. We may not fill arenas with lions, but we still consume humiliation as entertainment, laughing at viral videos of others suffering. We may not whip with iron lashes, but we normalize cruelty in schools, workplaces, and relationships, dismissing it as discipline. And we may not send people to mines, but we allow suffering to remain hidden, in sweatshops, prisons, or forgotten communities, where silence buries lives as effectively as rock and dust. The echo is unmistakable. The architecture of domination has not disappeared. It has only changed form. Rome teaches us that control often works not through laws or force alone, but through humiliation, visibility, and silence. The question is not whether cruelty exists; it always will. The question is whether we recognize it, and whether we resist normalizing it. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once reminded his contemporaries, "Servi sunt? Immo homines." They are slaves? No, they are human beings. His words cut across time. They remind us that no label, no punishment, no system can erase the truth of human dignity. To deny another's humanity is to endanger our own. So as we close this journey through Rome's punishments, let us not see only their brutality. Let us also see the courage of those women who fled, who risked everything for a glimpse of freedom. Their stories challenge us. If they could resist under threat of iron, beasts, whips, and darkness, what excuses do we have when faced with smaller forms of injustice today? History is not distant. It is a mirror. And in that mirror, we see the same forces: fear, humiliation, control, still at work. The lesson of Rome is not only that cruelty once existed, but that it persists wherever power seeks to silence freedom. The final question, then, is ours. When we witness suffering, do we become like the Roman crowd, cheering, mocking, looking away? Or do we dare to stand apart, to remember what Rome tried to forget, that behind every scar, every chain, every silence, there is still a human being reaching toward light?